listener, and thank you for tuning in to the Sleepless Cinematic Podcast. My name is Madeline Johnson.
I'm Julian Barthold.
I'm Emilio Tostado.
And what you're going to be listening to is something that later got a lot more fleshed out, which essentially is just the three of us who know each other from working together at a Midtown Manhattan music school, just hanging back and talking about movies, which is something that we love to do.
Yeah, it was something that was an outgrowth of us hanging out at the end of the night and figured it would be fun to see, in a recorded fashion. And so here it is. This is the start of it.
This kind of episode that you're about to listen to is what we end up calling a close-up. And this was sort of the first time that we actually had this idea kind of fleshed out going into the recording. But ultimately, Julian had this idea of focusing on particularly a character actor. So that's something we decided to start with. Someone whose work in the film industry we really appreciate and being able to give them a little love.
And this could be someone who is well known to the average viewer or someone who you kind of have to dig a little deep for. And, for this person you're about to hear us discuss, there is, I think, a case to be made for both sides of that. So tonight we're trying out a new segment of our discussion where we're going to call this Close Up. And the idea of it is that we focus on a single specialist, and that's a broad term that can refer to an actor or a cinematographer, editor, film composer,
director,
below
the line somebody, although we'll probably go with people who have some form of notoriety.
Yes, at least to start.
Yeah.
But we're starting now. So we all were very interested in talking about character actors, people who are often not the top billed in the movies that they're in, but they bring something special to, their own roles into the movie at large. And the actor we've decided to focus on tonight for this first segment is Joe Pantoliano, Joey Pants.
Yes, Joey Pants.
Often not the top billed in the movies that he's in, but he is in many different turns unforgettable.
Yeah, I mean, he always seems to provide some kind of secret sauce to a film. Yeah. One of the things that I thought a lot about when we were preparing for today was trying to pin down a couple of those qualities.
Does he have a type?
Yeah. Are there some kind of traits that you can more or less count on him to provide? And I think there are a couple things.
There certainly are.
And yeah, I mean, to your point earlier about character actors, I think that's one of the things that is kind of nice about them sometimes is that sometimes when people watch movies, there is this untouchability that comes from looking at people like Tom Cruise or Denzel Washington or Charlize Theron. And when you look at somebody like Joe Pantoliano, he kind of looks like someone you might have grown up with.
Yeah.
And there's something really relatable about seeing somebody that you might have grown up with just owning a role on a screen.
He could work at the deli.
Totally.
Yeah.
Even if you look not just at their presence on screen, but often like the arcs of their careers in general, there's something a little more down to earth about them where many of them, like they become famous a little later in life than say someone like Timothée Chalamet, people of that nature, or some of the other stars who you just mentioned. And a lot of them on TV roles, they really get their time to shine.
Totally. Yeah, you had sent us a list of like kind of character actors that you admire that would be kind of interesting to talk about in this discussion. As I was trying to add to the list, I found myself coming back to television like more and more often.
Yeah, and our subject tonight, Joey Pants, is certainly a recipient of that benefit. And then in general about character actors, they usually, maybe they're playing these roles that, as you said, Madeline, are more like, the guy you see at the deli, that sort of person. And even in their lives too, I mean, these are the people who I think really remind you that acting is a job.
Yeah.
That it's not all like fame and fortune for everybody, that these are people occupying the more working class rungs of the film and television industry or theater.
Yeah, I think Joe Pantoliano, from everything I've heard about him, he certainly has that life ethos about acting. It is a passion, it's a calling, but it is a job. It is about putting money in the bank, putting food on the table. This guy is willing. He's totally willing to work.
And you see that time and time again with character actors. Like you look up a character actor on IMDb and they'll have 200 acting credits. You look up James Hong and he has like 500 acting credits. You see that
Unreal.
time and time again with these character actors.
Yeah. I think Joe Pantoliano's filmography number is what, north of 125? Something around there. Yeah, this might be a moment to...
On IMDb, it's 154.
Oh, I was going to say 150, and I thought that was a little high. So
yeah,
I'm encouraged by that, right? Just making our point. This guy's willing to work.
Yeah. And another interesting point about character actors in general is that really a lot of people, to kind of bridge the gap, assuming that there is one between character actors and stars, is that a lot of people we now would consider to be stars were for a long time character actors. They kind of, they paid their dues in that realm and then they kind of rose to the top. And these are, real like household names, people like Samuel L. Jackson or Steve Buscemi or Philip Seymour Hoffman or more recently Olivia Colman, people like that.
I was also thinking like Rick Moranis. I think about as being so interesting as a character actor, and he brings that kind of energy to his lead roles as well.
To the point that you just said, there's something that those years gave them that kind of hardened them a little bit.
Yeah.
And, kind of...
It educates them in the industry as well.
Yeah. So they can maneuver, I think, rather shrewdly, in a way too, that sometimes means they stay character actors because they know that that's where their bread and butter is, or they ascend and become more the kind of top billed names. So.
Yeah, I was actually kind of thinking about that comparison of people who, as you say, have like paid their dues and sort of moved up versus people like I'd say Joey Pants here, who that became like just part of his identity. And I think he shows a real respect for the institution of character acting in particular, that it's not that I don't think he could lead a film, but he brings so much to these supporting roles.
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah. And I think this is part of why he's a good person, because we're presumably going to talk about many more character actors over time, but he's a good person to start with because he really is, he fits the role very well as a character actor, but, a lot of people, whether they realize it or not, they know about him and they appreciate his work.
Yeah, he really is one of the quintessential character actors, I think.
Yeah. I was curious as to who else you guys would kind of think of when you first think character actor. Who are some of the first people that come to your mind?
I mean, it's funny. You mentioned one that I thought of, or that I think of a lot, which is Philip Seymour Hoffman.
Yes.
I feel like the first really the first decade of his career he was doing that. I mean, he was in Scent of a Woman, very famously in that movie, and
Boogie Nights.
And Boogie Nights and the Paul Thomas Anderson films and whatnot.
Yeah.
But I would agree. I think of him and I feel like he's somebody who kind of graduated from being just character actor to well-revered, and now, unfortunately, or posthumously, looked back on as one of the kind of masters of his generation.
Yeah. And for me, apart from Joey Pants, of course, one of the other top character actors for me is Stephen Root.
Oh, yeah.
And
that's a good one.
Yeah. I mean, in general, we've talked a lot already about how the Coen brothers are great with character actors, but he's one of the people who they work with the most.
Yeah.
And I think, kind of similarly to what we were talking about in general, that he is the sort of person who can be on screen either, for a lot of screen time in a, secondary role, or for even just a short amount of screen time, but do something so incredibly memorable with that, whatever that amount of time is.
Have you seen my red stapler? That's Stephen Root, right?
Yeah, that's him.
Okay, good.
Yeah, it's like it's maybe a little more mumbly. Like, have you seen my red stapler?
There you go. That is good, man.
Thank you.
Yeah. On the subject of Joey Pants, I'm curious, where was the first time what was your first encounter with Joe Pantoliano? I'm trying to figure out what to call him, by the way.
Yeah.
Because Joey Pants, I feel like is a little too colloquial. It's like,
He refers to
I don't know.
himself with
He
that.
does. He does. Yeah. But it's like, I think in their emails we were shooting out, I liked JP.
Yeah.
I also was thinking of Jurassic Park when I heard JP. So I didn't want to, I was like, maybe that would conflate a little bit too much in my head.
That's a movie he's not in.
Yeah. But it's true.
Yeah. I will probably go between all of those names at some point.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
I probably will too.
Yeah.
So what was the first movie that you saw him in?
So the first movie I saw him in, I mean, technically speaking, I have next to no memory of this, but it would have been a kid's movie that my parents took me to see when I was, just a little kid, called Racing Stripes, about like animals racing. And I mean, again, I have next to no memory of this other than having seen it and, looking on Joe Pantoliano's resume and seeing that he was in it. But as far as what I first remember him in, it has to be The Matrix. Which I saw, when I was like a preteen and, probably around the age most people first see that movie. And, I think it was a mixture of both, maybe recognizing the name from before, but also just, knowing that he has such an important role in that movie.
Totally. Madeline, how about you?
It's definitely the same for me. I think The Matrix, and I think that, as you were saying, that's also, I think, kind of aside from The Sopranos, which we will probably get to later, that is when people are like, wait, who was that again? Then I think oftentimes this is the role that sparks that memory immediately.
Yeah.
Sure. I also would venture a guess to say that for a particular generation, The Matrix is a huge flashpoint moment.
Yeah.
I would totally consider myself one as well. If it weren't for the fact that I grew up in Chicago, and for me, it was The Fugitive. Mm-hmm. He plays sort of like a second in command role to Tommy Lee Jones's Samuel Gerard. And I just remember him being kind of a wisecracker, but like not too much. Again, we'll talk about it soon, but for me, it was 100% The Fugitive.
Yeah, I think it's worth noting too that there's this period of his filmography where, within just a few back-to-back years, he was in a few roles that are probably among the best known for him, where you have The Matrix in 1999, then you have Memento in 2000, which we'll also talk more about in a bit, and then The Sopranos, his role begins in 2001 on that show.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so that is a real hot moment for his career.
Yeah. And certainly, like for me, those are the first three roles that I think of with him. But then, as you were saying, for other people, The Fugitive might be the thing that looms larger.
Sure. When you guys think of Joe Pantoliano, are there any adjectives that immediately come to mind to describe his presence on screen? Because casting agents have certainly cued in on something with him. For me, it's humorously argumentative. He is kind of a rageful person in a lot of his roles, but I oftentimes find that when there has to be somebody who is really high strung or somebody who is just off their rocker, but that you're looking for comedic effect, he is surprisingly good at that.
Yeah.
Midnight Run being another movie that he's in is, to me, that like quintessential humorously argumentative kind of role. I also would point to something like his role as the police chief in Bad Boys.
Haven't seen that.
That is his role to a T. He's willing to get into a fight. He'll get very loud, but you'll kind of laugh at him when he's doing it.
Totally.
And yeah, I mean, I think the first word that comes to my mind to describe a lot of his roles is double crosser. Yeah, I mean, it's, less descriptive of like his aura in his roles, but more just of the function of the character, often in the form of a gangster, a criminal of some kind, but not exclusively that. Sometimes he's cast as a cop, as he is in The Fugitive. Although, interestingly, sometimes in the cop role, he still is just as much of a criminal.
Right. There's a dirtiness to
Yeah.
that and I think there's a dirtiness in general that he brings to his movies.
Yeah.
Yeah. Some more thoughts on that later, but what about you, Madeline?
I'm going to go with moxie. Because I think that we've kind of talked about, like, oftentimes he plays kind of a complicated character that maybe has this shift partway through, or there's some kind of reveal that we find out about. Or sometimes, I mean, we kind of think in The Fugitive, not so much. I mean, he's very much just like, he's there, like, doing his job. Like, he is the comedic relief, I think, in that. And he does that very well. But I think the adjective that applies to all of these different types of roles of his is moxie.
Sure. Yeah. Even if he is an authority figure, it seems like he doesn't like authority.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And so, and he brings some level of kind of streetwise, or like you say, like willingness to be the guy who is going to stand up to people, or is going to yell at somebody, or get in someone's face.
Yeah, he's not going to back down from a fight.
Yeah. I think it's really interesting because he talks about how growing up, he would get picked on and he would never actually fight people. He felt very cowardly, that he always kind of would kind of play it off like he could make a joke out of things. But that internally, it hurt him a lot to do that. And so acting allowed him a place to sort of live out those fantasies of actually inflicting harm.
I'm the tough guy.
Exactly. It's really, I find that really interesting that maybe as a human being, Joe Pantoliano is, or doesn't totally embody the kind of roles that he has, but that it is certainly a side of him that, like a lot of actors, they, through their roles, choose to
like
kind of live out.
Yeah.
And harness. Yeah.
Wow, that's powerful to think about.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it totally is. I think it's one of the reasons why we're all in this room talking on microphones.
It's interesting to think about that. Maybe like we imagine him as like that kind of being his personality in real life.
Totally.
We've just projected this onto him. And I think we often do that with actors. And it's interesting, I think, with him, because he does kind of come back to these, like this particular type again and again, and varies it, I think, very well. But we just kind of assume like, oh, that's probably how he is in real life. But really, he may be a very gentle soul.
Yeah.
He totally does. He's very reflective. He seems like a really nice guy who just happens to have found his niche in the acting world, being a little bit of a crazy, unhinged guy.
And talking about like the whole character actor thing in general, and we were talking about how much they work and how they are there like day after day, putting the work in, doing the job, treating it like a job rather than like for the glamour. And I think that it takes a particular kind of person to be able to commit to something like that throughout your life.
Oh, totally.
I was surprised to hear in the interview or a couple of the interviews that I heard, people would actually ask him a lot about like, well, like, what was your big break? And like, I think a lot of character actors would say, he was like, well, I've had a lot of little breaks. And one of the big breaks, or first breaks that he had, was he did a made-for-TV movie series that was a remake of the 1950s sort of classic film From Here to Eternity. And it was really interesting. He was still a really young guy. I mean, he was in his mid-20s or so. I mean, he was also in a bunch of movies in the late 70s and early 80s that, interestingly, all were centered around the beginning of rock and roll. You know, he was in Eddie and the Cruisers, which was like in 1983 or so, La Bamba, which was in 1988, The Idolmaker, which is another movie that's like very similar to all those others, and then another movie called The In Crowd. He even references another made-for-TV movie called Rock and Roll Mom, but he's like, dude, I can't get away from this. And that was a big part of his... that was a staple kind of genre for him. I think that there was oddly something about his personality or his physicality that would put him very easily in a period piece from the 1950s or 1960s. And I don't know, I find that really interesting because I don't always think about that when I think about Joe Pantoliano.
Yeah.
He seems, I mean, he is a bit of a shapeshifter in some respects, but I never really think about him as a young actor too much. He always is sort of mid 40s to mid 50s sort of range, but he was definitely working at that time.
Yeah. And this is a pretty good segue into the portion of our discussion where we're going to focus more on some specific roles of his.
Yeah.
And those three, just to forecast them, are in the movies Risky Business, The Fugitive, and Memento. And we'll talk about a few more alongside them, but those are really, we've chosen them really as objects of focus for today. I guess Risky Business was the first time, even though he had been working for quite a bit up until then, this was the first time in a movie that he really had this role that seemed to gain him some notoriety.
We were talking earlier about maybe what's the first thing you remember him from.
Right.
I think for earlier generations,
Yeah.
a lot of people think about him as Guido, the killer pimp.
Yeah.
He doesn't do much killing in the movie, by the way.
I don't think he does any killing.
I don't think he does
Yeah.
at all.
But he seems capable. of
Totally.
it.
A character in Risky Business calls him that. And
Yeah.
Exactly.
You can't forget it once you hear
Right.
it.
When a character in that movie thinks of him as being a killer, it starts to sort of pepper everything after. But
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Madeline, I don't know how you feel about
Yeah,
about
no,
that necessarily.
I would agree. I mean, I think that movie does a really good job of there is this separation kind of class-wise that's very apparent in that film. And I think that obviously these like kind of upper middle class or higher, like very privileged high school kids like have a very particular image of what a sex worker is and
Totally.
what a pimp is.
Yeah.
But kind of going back a little bit further, just to zoom out a bit. So in 1983, we have Risky Business and Joey Pants, Joe Pantoliano. I'm not going to be able to say it.
That's okay.
And I know that. That's why I keep shortening it. Playing Guido the Killer Pimp. And it's funny, we were talking about him being, I think, so well known later for roles where he's slightly older. He's only 32 in this. He feels older to me.
Yeah. Interesting. I also would not place him as 32.
Yeah.
I think maybe watching the movie, like I could see him being that age in that role, but I think you see so much of what's to come in that.
Sure.
In that Risky Business role that, you know, maybe you just can't not think about what comes later.
Definitely. So for those who haven't seen Risky Business, so it's also famously Tom Cruise's breakout role. He's quite young. I think he's about 20 when this movie comes out. So high school student Joel, played by Tom Cruise, is left alone for the weekend when his parents go away on a trip. And his friend Miles convinces him to have a little fun, let loose some over the weekend. They go on a little joyride, doing donuts in the parking lot, etc.
Yep.
And one of the things that he does is call up a sex worker, a call girl from the newspaper. And the person that originally arrives is not really, you know, who he was expecting.
Right. But to your point earlier about,
Yeah,
you know, the
exactly.
expectations, and they reference that very clearly in the movie too.
Yeah,
it's through that sex
exactly.
worker that he ends up actually meeting the sex worker that the movie starts to actually sort of revolve around.
Exactly. Who is more of like his typical fantasy. And the
Right.
original person that arrives does allude to this and is like, oh, well, call Lana. You know, she's what every white boy near the lake wants.
Exactly. Yeah.
So we meet Lana, and they seem to have a great night together. But the next morning, things go a bit awry because seemingly it did not occur to Joel that he might not have enough money to pay this woman. So he leaves to go to the bank, and I mean, she has no reason to believe he's going to return with her money. So she grabs an expensive decorative egg and takes off.
I've never been in that situation before, but I would have to imagine that if you are leaving your home in order to procure funds for somebody,
Particularly when you're living in a pretty fancy
Exactly.
house with fancy silverware.
you
and
find a way
such.
to get everybody out of that house, go to a neutral place, keep them out of that house.
Yeah, come with me. Let's go to the bank.
Exactly. Yes. Yes.
Essentially, at the very end of the film, he manages to get the egg back, but his mother notices a little scratch. And all I can think is like, why are you leaving this just you have a 18-year-old boy in your house.
Totally.
Like, you don't have pets or anything. Like, I'm shocked that she thought that she could just leave it on her mantelpiece and it would not break or be damaged. Anyway, coming back into Joel's desperate move to try to get this egg back from Lana. He tracks her to Chicago.
Like downtown Chicago.
Yeah, to like
Because
downtown.
He
They're at
and
a
his family
hotel.
live like in the suburbs, the north suburbs.
Yeah. So he tracks her, and she is kind of desperate to get away from her manager, her pimp, Guido the Killer Pimp.
Yeah.
Joe Pantoliano.
Yes.
I don't know if this is just something, it definitely didn't originate from this movie. You said something about Double Cross earlier when you think about Joe Pantoliano and some of the roles that he's played. There's definitely this switch that a lot of pimps in movies play where they can be really friendly and they'll be your best friend, and then they'll turn around and they'll just yell obscenities at the women that are technically his employees or that he's, you know, pimping.
Yeah.
I don't know why. Again, humorously argumentative. I think the way he's introduced in that movie is when Joel is coming out to see what's happening, and Lana and a friend of hers beeline into the house, and Guido is trying to follow them in. And it's sort of like Joel's big stand. He's like, I'm going to be a man here, and I'm going to protect the house. And I'm going to say, you know, hey, you're not going to pass. And Guido very much just sort of cuts him down to size.
Yeah.
And is like, dude, I see what's going on here. And it's cute, but
you're in over your head.
You're in over your head. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. And even going back to your point about like how these kind of characters can switch on a dime, it's like if you go back a little bit further, we do get a brief moment with him in downtown Chicago when
you're right. Sorry,
when Lana's trying to get away from him, and they're in the car, they meaning Joel and Lana and the friend Miles, and he's sort of like knocking on the window, and at first he's like, Lana, I'm not going to hurt you, just come out. And then when Joel kind of starts to try to start the car and drive away, at this point he's got the gun out. At this point Guido's like, I'm gonna fucking kill you.
Exactly.
And then we get a car chase scene, and it's like, I mean, he in his mind is like, she is his property.
Totally.
And he is losing out on funds by her escaping.
The situation with Guido, and directly and indirectly, leads to his sort of sink or swim moment, which is how am I going to find a way to get a bunch of money?
Yeah.
To fix a submarined Porsche. Thank you. I love that line, by the way, when the guy goes like, who's the submarine commander here? Fantastic. And so that sets up sort of the big situation in this movie where Joel suddenly, very much influenced by Lana, they devise this plan to not just be about titillating Joel, but titillating all of his friends. And finding a way to not just make money off of Joel, but making money off of all of them. And so that's sort of the situation here where Guido almost represents this kind of streetwise guy that cracked into this adult world, but through sort of criminal means.
Yeah.
And it's like, is Joel going to do the same? Does Joel see value in doing that? Is there intrinsic value in just being like, I'm here to make a buck? And that's something that definitely Lana contends with, and not so directly the Guido character does, but he's a representation of that.
Yeah, because Joel is presented as like, he's in a school club called the Future Enterprisers. He like wants to be a businessman. There's some sort of joke early on where like he and his friends are at like a diner, and they're all talking about like how much money they're going to make depending on which college they go to and what major and like what degree they get. And he says something like, is all we care about just how much money we make? And it's like, yes, that's all anybody in this movie cares about.
Right. Well, and exactly. And towards the end of the movie, that's what really, I think that's one of the big messages of the film, is like how corruptible can you sort of be as a teenager?
Yeah.
And like how primed was Joel before this week to kind of go there and embrace it? Or is that something that is just very new to him?
He is so desperate to get into a good college. He's aiming for this same kind of life that he's led so far and that his parents lead. But ultimately, he's sort of seeing this like other option. It's the same skills.
Totally.
It's the same skill set that he's forming, selling his whatever they were making.
100%. To tie it slightly back to the Joe Pantoliano aspect of this, The Risky Business, I don't know, had you guys seen that movie before recently?
No, actually.
Okay, so I've always kind of liked this movie, and I've always liked it because it sort of has felt sort of like the anti-John Hughes high school comedy. It certainly predates the real big John Hughes movies.
Yeah.
So it's not necessarily like it's a movie that was made in response. When you watch it, it is not some easy breezy, Bob Seger and jumping around in underwear. It's a movie that really kind of confronts this issue of capitalism and the corrupting nature of it. It came out at a time when there were a lot of teenage and high school comedies. And one of the things I remember reading about that Joe Pantoliano said is when he made this movie, he had no idea that this was going to be a movie that was going to last even, a couple months, or that it was going to have any success. When he first got attached to it, he did not really see it as very different than a movie like Porky's, which was a huge hit at the time, but was really just sort of a sex comedy. I think not even somebody who was on the ground floor with it, someone like Joe Pantoliano, it was not something that was all that obvious, but something that I think came out as the film was being made and as it was being directed and whatnot. So I've always really thought this is a particularly interesting movie. And it's weird because he's not really in the movie that much. But he's certainly like a catalyst.
Yeah. He only really has 4 scenes in the movie, if you count them. And very limited screen time as a result. And, he has, those 2 points kind of at the end of the, kind of as the movie segues from first act to second act, which we mentioned before. And then right at the end, he, just when, I'm trying to remember the Tom Cruise character's name.
Joel.
Yeah. Just when Joel thinks he's out, then Guido pulls him back in.
Totally.
Because Joel comes home and all of his belongings are gone. He comes home to a completely empty house.
Yes, with 2 hours to go before his parents arrive home from this trip that they've taken. And he has to figure out how is he going to get this furniture back. And so he has this very memorable scene where he calls, he believes he's calling Lana, but then Guido picks up the phone. There's some great dialogue in that scene. And I have to say that there's 2 phone calls there. One where Joel is hung up on by a seemingly angry Guido, and he calls Guido an a-hole, verbatim a-hole right before being hung up on. And then he calls again when Guido picks up the phone again. The first word he says is a-hole. And I was cracking up so much when he said that because Joey Pants' delivery was perfect there.
Yeah. In the movie, it is a little unclear if Lana was in on the scam or the scheme to rob him.
The other woman is essentially Guido tells Joel he can buy all his stuff back.
Totally.
And so you see him in a moving truck, all right, here's your stereo, give me $400, going through and selling back all of his possessions from the money that he's made through all of these sex workers. And you see the friend that had originally come with Lana to Joel's house, who I think's name is Vicky.
I think that sounds right.
So Vicky's there helping. So the idea is that she was in on it on the very least. And maybe Lana was as well. We don't fully know.
Yeah. Well, I think when you dig into the making of the movie a little bit, the writer-director Paul Berkman's intention was for you at the end of the movie to very much know that she was in on it. Joel and Lana are eating dinner and he quietly confronts her about it. And she doesn't outwardly admit it, but she kind of says, that I was playing. And the theatrical release sort of ends on this note where it's not important. What's important is that Joel had this sort of coming of age moment, and he now is in a semi-relationship with this super hot Rebecca De Mornay, and so it sort of leaves everyone skipping out of the theater. Oh, what a sweet story. But that originally it was meant to be that she was playing him too. And that at the very end, instead of taking a nice walk through downtown park, she sort of breaks down to him and says, I feel lost. I don't know what I'm doing. There's this sort of unspoken thing between them that there is a price to pay when you are just making money for the sake of making money. Yeah. And that if you're taking advantage of people, that there's something that you will eventually have to pay for.
Yeah.
The movie kind of does that, but then also, in the other hand, gives you a Joe Pantoliano performance at the end where he's cackling from the back of a moving truck. That's the last thing you see of him, just being like, good luck, you're going to need it, know? And he, in that movie, seems to sort of have this role of kind of sort of softening, I think, some of the bigger themes and presenting this sort of boogeyman character as also being kind of funny and also maybe somebody that you're quietly rooting for, that he also found a way to get something over on Joel and the rich people from the suburbs.
Yeah.
Yeah. And he's also, unlike in some of his later roles, this is a character that Joey Pants plays who doesn't really have to answer to anyone. He is the boss.
Totally.
Whereas, there's other times where he plays a character who's effectively a boss too, but more often than not, I think he plays an underling of some kind. And he's not at the top of the food chain, but, interestingly, this role where he seemingly is, and it's, there's, he does have that menacing energy of some of those later roles, but yeah, there is kind of a comic relief element to him too.
Yeah. Is there anything else you can think of for Risky Business? Anything else we want to say about Joey Pants, Joey P, JP?
I feel like we've covered it pretty well.
Yeah, I think
for
we're
that
good
movie.
for Risky Business. It's it's so interesting that this is so early on for him. That yes, he's been doing these like smaller films, smaller TV roles. But this is very early on in his career, and then he does continue to work throughout the 80s. But when you think about like kind of his best known roles, we would jump forward quite a bit, I think.
Probably. I would say, he also played one of the Fratelli brothers in The Goonies.
Yeah.
Which is not a movie.
Which is 85.
Yeah, 85. It's not a movie that I grew up with. I saw it probably about 3 or 4 years too late to really enjoy it and really take it in. There's good stuff in it. He's fine in it too, but he plays a very dopey version.
Yeah.
The things that I think are interesting about him as an actor don't really shine through.
Yeah. I've seen that movie, but not in a long time. And the short story that I'll tell about it is that I used to work at a middle school, and for some reason, another teacher was like, I'm going to show the Goonies.
Oh my.
I think he's looking at it through rose-colored glasses. He did not remember that this movie was absolutely not appropriate to play in a school setting. I think they got about 15 minutes in before he shut it off.
Oh, yeah, for sure. I mean, he was in that movie. I know he was also in Empire of the Sun, which is a movie I have not seen.
Same.
He was working the whole time, but
and that's, I think, something that's so interesting about the broader character actor thing that we're talking about is like, he is constantly working. And you alluded earlier to some of these like kind of rock and roll kind of roles that he does throughout the 80s. But when we think of character actors, oftentimes it's like there are a handful of roles that we associate with them, even though they're working more than your standard like leading man.
Totally.
Yeah.
For me, the one that always jumps out for me is The Fugitive, right? And he certainly played good-hearted or good-natured or even police officers. He played a couple of them before, but I think the one that he's probably best known for is the one in The Fugitive. Well, Bad Boys is also another one that jumps out. I think there will be a certain contingent of people that would probably say Bad Boys it's certainly a flashier role, I think. Okay, so in The Fugitive, he plays this guy, Cosmo Renfro, who is the second in command U.S. Marshal to Samuel Gerard, who is the Tommy Lee Jones character. And the movie it's based on a television series of the same name from the 1960s. And the premise is very simple in this movie. There is a surgeon, a doctor from Chicago. His wife is murdered, and he is suspected for the crime, and then he is charged for the crime, and he is sent to die for the crime. But on the way, something happens. Him and a couple other inmates escape, and in enters the U.S. Marshals. Very famously, Tommy Lee Jones, saying, your fugitive's name is Dr. Richard Kimball. Go get him. One of the things I think is really interesting about this movie is that it famously had a star attached to it, Harrison Ford. We have not talked about him yet, but he plays Richard Kimball. It had a title. It had its premise that was based on previous IP, and it had a release date. And so there were a lot of details about this movie that kind of miraculously came together.
Yeah.
And the writer Jeb Stewart, who is kind of credited as being the one who most directly wrote the movie, was kind of famously holed up, in a hotel room in Chicago where they were shooting, just sliding script pages under the door, like right before they would go to set to shoot. And so there was a lot of improvisation amongst the crew and the cast to sort of get the movie going and to give it its feel. It's not just Cosmo and it's not just Samuel Gerard. There are other U.S. Marshals in that group, but all of those actors were sort of kind of competing and sort of vying for who was going to have maybe the biggest presence in the movie. That's something I think is really interesting.
Yeah.
And you know who did? Our guy.
Joey Pants.
Joey Pants. This is what the other actors are saying, is that he was really good. He had an uncanny ability to always position himself right next to Tommy Lee Jones. Anytime that there was any type of back and forth that was happening in the movie, he was like right there. He was always on screen. And as a result, he kind of becomes the de facto second in command.
Yeah.
He was not written that way. He sort of willed it into existence, which I think is really, really funny.
Very impressive.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, speaks to moxie, right? Yeah. And another detail that I think is so funny about him in this movie is that, okay, so at the very end of the movie, there is this climactic sort of manhunt chase. Samuel Gerard, the Tommy Lee Jones character, and Cosmo, the two of them are in a laundry room trying to apprehend Richard Kimball and potentially somebody else. In that scene, as it was written, Cosmo Renfro was supposed to die. But he played it off like he didn't die. And he went against the wishes of the director, and he made a case afterward. He said, I don't want to die. What if there's a sequel? And guess what? There was a sequel. And guess who was also in that sequel?
Our guy,
Joe Pantoliano.
Yeah.
I think that is incredible. I don't know many stories about actors like that who just, like I said, willed himself into having the kind of presence in that movie that he did.
Yeah.
And then also, he called his shot. He said that there might be a sequel to this. And there certainly was. And in that movie, he very much is the second in command. Mm-hmm. So I don't know. Have you guys seen U.S. Marshals?
No.
Okay. So I definitely saw that movie because I was a fan of The Fugitive. It's not that great, although I think it's a little better than I remember it being. But it certainly suffers by comparison. And it definitely has like sequelitis. It's like everything is just like ramped up. It's like, it can't be a bus crash. It's a plane crash. He's not jumping off a dam. Like he's swinging through a city skyline from like a crane.
But they hit similar beats.
They hit a lot of similar beats. But yeah, man, in that movie, Joe Pantoliano's character is able to sort of develop a little bit more.
Yeah.
But I find it so amazing that it could have been anybody in that team of people.
Yeah, because I think at the very beginning, like they're all kind of equally.
Totally.
Yeah, they all like I think add an equal amount of like help to the initial investigation, and in addition to obviously our guy, but I also, as soon as I'm watching this movie, and I immediately see, and I had to look up her name, but I was like, she looks so familiar. Who is that? And L. Scott Caldwell, who is the black woman who is in this team, she's on the show Lost. She's really great in Lost. She's one of my favorite characters. Have you guys watched that show?
You know what? I haven't.
She's really fabulous in that. And she, like, not to spoil too much of a show that's been over for over a decade, but, you know, she has this kind of beautiful love story where, like, her character and her character's husband end up on different sides of the island, and they don't know if the other survived the crash. But we follow each of them separately, and so it's kind of the one beautiful story that you get in an otherwise pretty bleak
television show.
But yeah, I just wanted to call her out because I think she's very, very delightful in this.
Totally.
And she also adds a lot to her scenes. And I think it speaks to your point that, I mean, it could have been her too.
Totally. I think it's one of those things that just speaks to, his savvy in the industry is to kind of know when there's a good thing happening. We talked earlier about Risky Business. He didn't know, but there's a good 10 years between Risky Business and The Fugitive.
And he works that whole time, so he's learning a lot.
Exactly. And so by that point, he knows something interesting or he is quick to see the opportunity and strike for it. I mean, I remember certain lines and stuff that he says, but to me, the enduring legacy of Joey Pants in The Fugitive is entirely in those details.
Mm-hmm. I mean, interestingly about that movie too, I mean, as compared to his other roles where, just on the screen, we see him playing these really intimidating or chaotic characters. This is someone who's more of just kind of like a straight shooter, like who is kind of just doing a job, not trying to make any big deal of it. It's more just kind of, like an ordinary guy in some ways.
Yeah. And he doesn't have too many scenes where he's really off the rails.
Yeah.
In fact, I don't think he really has any.
Yeah.
A lot of times his character is positioned as definitely subservient to the Samuel Gerard character.
Yeah.
But also sort of mirrors his energy a little bit, which is that they crack wise and a lot amongst one another, but they're very professional.
To speak to that opposite quality of it, I found while watching it that there are some points where, by contrast, Samuel Gerard, the Tommy Lee Jones character, he feels a little bit off the rails, and that Cosmo Renfro really is kind of the guy to reel him back in.
Totally.
To restore him to his calm, to keep him focused on what he's doing. Which I think, you rarely see that in a Joey Pants role. So it's, it speaks to his range, and it's just in itself a great role. And so, talking about him occupying the cop role and actually also occupying that kind of, straight shooter, ordinary guy role, it's an interesting segue into the next movie we want to focus on, which is Memento. And well, technically, the character he plays in that, James Edward or Teddy Gamble, is, technically he is a cop, but a very corrupt cop. So you kind of see in that role, Joey Pants is walking the line of a lot of his typical typecasting, where he is like, he's technically an agent of law enforcement, but he's still manipulator, an agent of chaos in some ways.
And in the way this movie is designed, we don't know for much of it that he is a cop.
Yeah.
And so as not to give that away, he has to play it both ways. He has to play it so that we see him as like, we're kind of suspicious of him. We know he's probably an antagonist, but he also, in some ways, you're like, maybe we can trust him. Like, you don't really know. You don't know until the end that he's a cop. And so at that point, you need to be able to go back and watch it through and say like, okay, yes, I see that he has to be able to play it both ways.
Yeah. And I think the movie is designed in a way, not only from a narrative perspective, but also how it's sort of edited to keep you guessing and to force you into a place where you really can't trust him.
Yeah.
When you start watching that movie, there's a lot you don't know.
Yes.
And as you continue watching the movie for a while, it just becomes more and more complicated. So what you're left to lean on is some of the kind of star system qualities of this. And when you say star system, really, it's just sort of like, what kind of relationship do we, the viewer, have with Joe Pantoliano before this? Does he seem like somebody who in past movies is somebody that we can trust?
Yeah, and I think that you get that same thing with Carrie-Anne Moss's character, where you sort of go back to like, what do I know about Carrie-Anne Moss? Like, what kind of roles does she typically fulfill? It kind of sets you up to trust her through much of the movie.
Totally.
Yeah. Memento is a great exercise in playing with the viewer's trust in so many ways. And as for like the point in Joe Pantoliano's career where this emerges, it's right off of the heat of The Matrix. At the point when Memento was being shot, The Matrix had already come out. It was a huge hit. And, the casting of both him and Carrie-Anne Moss in Memento had to do with The Matrix.
Yeah. I think actually she said that or he in an interview said that she recommended him for the movie.
I love that.
Yes.
Yeah, same here.
Yeah. Actors standing by each other.
Fantastic.
I mean, Christopher Nolan is still kind of a fledgling director at this point. You know, he's established himself with his debut following, but he's not really a huge name yet. And Memento is kind of the movie that propels him to greater notoriety. And so at this point, you kind of get the sense that Joe Pantoliano taking this role, even though it became iconic, it probably came from that same workman-like attitude that, you know, an actor like him would approach most roles, just that it's a job. But then, you know, this is released right off the heat of The Matrix, and it becomes, I think, one of his other most iconic roles. And, you know, to set the scene of Memento, it's a hard movie to summarize in a lot of ways.
It's a brilliant movie for that reason, you know.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah, for so many reasons.
yeah,
But
for sure.
you know, the brief description of it is that it's a movie about a character named Leonard Shelby, played by Guy Pearce, who suffers from short-term amnesia and is going through a bunch of episodes in his own life to essentially solve the mystery of his wife's murder.
One of the things that happens early on, or you find out really early on, is that he's seeking vengeance.
Yes.
And he has to take Polaroids in order to keep track of where he's been and who he's associating with.
And like leave notes for himself.
And leave notes for himself, or tattoo
Tattoo
details
them.
on his body.
And just really fast, just for anyone that hasn't seen this movie, the very important detail is that we see this in reverse.
Yes, that's true. Yeah. Or it's weird. It's like, it's this kind of
Yeah.
weird thing where it's like it takes from two different ends, and then at one point it sort of like meets in the middle.
Yeah, it sort of has this one scene that's like kind of dispersed throughout.
Yeah.
But much of the plot, I think, is seen in reverse.
Yeah, and then also it's kind of segmented into these little episodes that roughly capture the periods in which Leonard Shelby can remember what's going on. Like the points when the scene changes are the points when his memory supposedly wipes.
Yeah.
And so then, you know, Joe Pantoliano's character in this movie is this cop who keeps appearing throughout the story at intervals that, you know, as you're piecing it together, they feel kind of uneven.
Yeah. Well, and he doesn't present himself as a cop.
Right.
Yeah.
He really just kind of seems like somebody who has taken an interest
Yeah.
in Leonard.
And that's also how Leonard has to see it, because every time he sees Teddy, he's meeting him for the first time.
Totally. You know, the way that the movie is constructed and the way that it's edited and the way it kind of unfolds is this sort of beautiful commentary on how the main character is experiencing things too. And to me, the opening title sequence in this movie is like an all-time incredible thesis statement. The Polaroid that when you see it is actually exposed, but
It's
then
developed,
as if you know anything about Polaroids, you take the picture, it would come out of the camera, and it would take some actual air. So you would actually kind of, you know, like shake it a little bit, Outcast style, shake it like a Polaroid picture, in order to sort of speed up the exposure or the reveal of whatever you took. And yeah, the movie like flips it. It shows you the exposed, and then the more it's shook to sort of demonstrate this sort of desire to sort of see what's happening, it actually disappears. And what you see very soon is that whole sequence was shown to you in reverse.
Because then it goes back into the camera.
Yeah, exactly. It goes back into the camera. And so it's just this wonderful thesis statement about the main character's desire to understand and doing all these things to try to get there, but that the world that he's living in is not allowing him to do that. It's awesome. Sorry, that's my minute about that. I just think it's so freaking cool.
Memento has staying power for a lot of reasons, that among them. And yeah, for the Joe Pantoliano role, you know, maybe he is like a bona fide gangster. Maybe he is crooked law enforcement. Maybe there are points where he just kind of feels like this weird stalker guy too.
Yeah, because on the surface he's like mostly friendly to Leonard, but Leonard, because we're seeing this in reverse, and we later will see him write this note, but from the beginning of the film, the note is like, do not believe his lies.
Yeah.
Yeah. Without spoiling too much, you know, he really becomes the true tether to reality in this film. You know, all the exposition and the possible directions that the movie presents and veers towards and then away from, all of that sort of rests on his character and how he's able to sort of maneuver in that world and then kind of make sense of it. And so in many ways, we see him sort of as maybe the big kind of puppeteer of this whole scenario.
Because you don't really know what Leonard's history is with these characters. He doesn't know what his history is with these people he's meeting. He doesn't know if he's meeting them for the first time, if he's known them for a couple of days, or if he's known them for years.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then, I mean, to call, Gamble, the Joey Pants character, the puppeteer, that's a great term for that character because he effectively sees Leonard Shelby's weakness and knows how to exploit him.
Totally.
There is something very clever about how he's using this character too. So, it's an interesting, like this Gamble character really kind of plays you both ways in that sense too, that he's on one hand kind of a mastermind, but on the other hand, he kind of creates his own demise.
Yeah. And you know what, to your point too, you talk about him being brazen. There's this calm to how he just lays everything out. Mm-hmm. There's a way that he does it where he's like, that's just what it is. It's almost the nonchalance of it all.
It's so nonchalant that it almost makes you feel like is something else coming.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. Or it's like, what else has happened here?
Yeah.
He embodies that sort of corruption that I think we have been able to attribute to a Joey Pants type character, but he's not pitched up. It's business as usual.
Yeah.
It's almost a little freaky.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, just the openness with which he expresses himself in a way, is actually a weakness as we find out in the movie, but it says a lot about the character too. To talk a little bit about his presence in the billing of Memento, I mean, this is a role, you would say that Joe Pantoliano is the third highest billed in this movie after Carrie-Anne Moss and Guy Pearce. Notably, when you watch the movie in the opening credits, his name appears before the title, which in other things you see him in is often not the case. So this is a point where even though Memento is still, kind of in the humble beginnings relatively of Christopher Nolan's career, Joe Pantoliano is elevated to a more or less starring role in that movie.
Yeah, even though Christopher Nolan now, the name and the career has a lot of cachet.
Yeah,
it feels a little bit more like an independent movie, in some respects. But yeah, his presence in it is pretty outsized, not just in how he is performing, but in what kind of a role he has in the story.
Yeah.
And I have to wonder what it must have been like to shoot that movie if it was a lot more straightforward than it ends up being to watch as a viewer. And that for him, like playing that character, it may have been a very ordinary process.
One of the things that I heard him say that I thought was really funny is he said, when it came to what's actually happening in Memento and what's actually happening in The Matrix, he's like, man, I have no idea. He's like, there were words I had to read. I read them. There were marks I had to be on. I was there. Again, speaking to his workman-like nature, it's just another paycheck for Joey Pants.
Yeah, though I'm sure that for like roles like that, he can look back on his work fondly, with a certain amount of healthy pride. But that actually, that point about looking back at the role, I feel like that's an interesting segue away from Memento and into his role in The Sopranos as Ralph Cifaretto. I remember hearing in his interview with Mark Maron that he did not watch his role in The Sopranos, even to the point that interview was recorded. He didn't have an HBO subscription, never saw it. And I
love that detail.
His reasoning was that character was such a horrible human being that he didn't even want to risk having his children see that role.
Wow.
Well, he's right about it, that Ralph Cifaretto is a monster of a human being.
Totally. In a lot of the ways that he brings a certain type of humor and, dare I say, likability to people that, again, seem pretty morally ambiguous or morally questionable. He also achieves that in The Sopranos.
Yeah.
And, in that show, I know he was in that show for 2 seasons, but definitely left his mark on the show, not just from a narrative perspective, but I think also amongst fans.
Even though he is on the show for, compared to other characters, a limited amount of time, I mean, he has kind of like, in his role in Risky Business and so many other things, he is kind of a catalyst for so many of the important plot points that happen on the show.
Totally.
That there's like a simple wisecrack that he makes, or not even a wisecrack, just a joke, an insult joke that he makes at the beginning of season 4 that foments tension that lasts all the way till the end of the series.
Absolutely. Yeah. I always think about that detail. Johnny Sack.
Yeah.
Just won't let it go. So yeah, no, it's The Sopranos is a show that I think really set a rubric for a lot of the television that was going to follow. And, I think you can look at a lot of other television shows and sort of see that kind of, not, I don't want to say one-off, but that, they write in a character like him.
Yeah.
That it's catnip for the right kind of actor.
Yeah.
Who's willing to sort of go there. And, Joey Pants, man, he really pulls that one off.
Yes.
That show, I think, in seasons prior had like the Richie Aprile character.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
He sort of fulfills that role, being the kind of wild card.
Disruptor.
The guy who sort of comes back into the family and who is very successful, but also is an absolute maniac.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I mean, it's a really indelible role. And I think him and his arc and sort of the back and forth that he has with Tony Soprano in that show is some of the really memorable stuff.
And honestly, when I think about Joe Pantoliano roles that stand out to me, that might be the one at the top of the list.
Sure. In a way that a lot of television allows actors and characters to do, there is a real arc to his character.
Yeah.
By the end of his time on that show, there is something rather tragic that happens to his family.
Yeah.
And the way that his character is set up, you almost feel bad for him.
Yeah.
And again, it's a credit to the writing, it's a credit to the acting that his character is able to sort of take that arc.
When you look at that very last episode where he appears, I mean, people often cite that as one of the best episodes of the entire series of The Sopranos, and probably, I think that's the episode that won him the Emmy, where you really see so many, in just the span of about an hour, you see so many sides of that one character where you almost feel bad for him, but you remember who he is too.
Totally. I'm sorry, Madeline. I feel like we left you out of this, but have you seen The Sopranos?
So I've really only seen like kind of random episodes of The Sopranos. I've never watched from the beginning. I've meant to for a long time. So I feel like I can't contribute too much to this, and that is okay. I totally expected that. I knew we were going to get into Sopranos, and I was like, should I try to like binge 2 seasons of The Sopranos before this? I chose not to do that. I don't think that's the right way to absorb
that's probably
it.
better for your sanity too. And your just general health overall.
Exactly.
Yeah. A funny thing about the appearance of that character, Ralph Cifaretto, is that, I mean, this is a detail on Joe Pantoliano's Wikipedia page, so I don't know how true it is, but there's a citation from an article from 2020. He wore a wig based on Christopher Nolan's hair to supposedly avoid being recognized by fans.
One thing I did hear him say later in an interview was that after Memento and the success of that film, Christopher Nolan actually offered him some other roles, specifically a dirty cop in the first Batman movie that I think he did.
Wow.
One that meets a grisly end. And that Joey Pants turned it down, again, speaking to his career conscious nature. He was like, man, I just won an Emmy for Ralph Cifaretto.
Yeah.
I'm kind of on a sort of a career high at this point. I don't really want to take a step back. He's like, I've done that a bunch.
Yeah.
And so he turned it down, but apparently he's like, I never heard back from Christopher Nolan. And so I don't know if maybe that bridge got burned. Maybe there was a little bit more to modeling the hair after Christopher Nolan than just, this maybe would look like something that would, maybe it would fit my character. Maybe there's something else there. I have no idea.
Interestingly, though, if you've seen the Wachowski sisters' first movie, Bound, Joey Pants also has a big role in that as the main antagonist. And he looks exactly the same as Ralph Cifaretto.
I was going to say, I've seen little clips of Bound, and I was like, wait a minute, this really does look like there was like a shared universe between those two worlds, and it was like the Wachowskis, and then eventually the Sopranos. It all sort of came together.
Yeah, and that's before he would have met Christopher Nolan too. So he just, he had that same wig for that role. So it makes you wonder. Yeah, with this Sopranos role too. Interestingly, we mentioned way earlier in the conversation that that Joe Pantoliano is from Hoboken, New Jersey. And, well, I guess geographically, The Sopranos, this is the role that's closest to home for him.
Sure.
At least among the ones that we've talked about, where Risky Business and The Fugitive are both set largely in the Chicagoland area. And then Memento is out in California.
One thing I want to sort of tie into is, The Sopranos is a television show that at its origin is about this idea of the mobster and having to, live this life of violence, but then also sort of take on all this trauma that comes out through therapy, right?
Yeah.
And really interestingly enough, Joe Pantoliano is a big proponent of therapy.
In real life.
In real life, yeah. When we think about maybe things that aren't readily apparent to us when we think about the actor or his roles, he is a really big advocate for treating mental illness with a lot of seriousness. And he's written a couple books that are very reflective about the idea of trauma and post-traumatic stress and the kind of toll that it can take on you if it's not something that you treat. I think it's kind of interesting that he found this sort of career-defining role on a television show that was trying to sort of balance the idea of a very violent profession and life, but also having to come to terms with it through therapy.
Yeah. Yeah. And I remember hearing in the Mark Maron interview too, that he experienced these very deep lows of depression when he was in what you would think was the height of fame, like after The Sopranos, after Memento, after all of that, there were these points where, he knew on paper he should feel great about himself and he just didn't. And I think that was around the point when you started seeking therapy. And that there was a role from around that time in a movie called Canvas, which I haven't seen, but where he plays a lead role, and not like third billing, like top billing lead role, and that role supposedly helped him come to terms with the illness of depression. And I'm sure that there's a lot more to his journey that goes beyond just that period of his life. But yeah, that's a very important detail about him.
Yeah, and he's founded an organization called No Kidding, Me Too, which works to destigmatize mental illness and encourage people to seek help and, as you say, to seek therapy.
Yeah, that's really great that he stands for that.
Yeah.
We've mentioned a lot of fun trivia along the way, but, just to kind of wrap things up, one anecdote about his career, which is great to know, but is you have to dig a little bit deeper for it, is that he had a role, though it did not make the final cut, but he had a role in The Godfather Part 2. When he was very, very young, he would have been in his early 20s, younger than any of us are now, when he was in that role. And that, according to the Mark Maron interview, supposedly he kind of came upon that job without initially knowing it was going to be for the second Godfather movie, but that he was kind of, for some reason or another, hanging around near the set, saw something was going on, and kind of, I guess, kind of smooth talked his way into working onto it. And then
some Cosmo Renfro energy,
some Cosmo Renfro, and then basically he tried to convince either Francis Ford Coppola himself or some crew member that he was a stunt guy, and that Coppola, took him to show him some building that he was going to do a stunt jump off of or something like that. And he looked at him and said, it's a tough stunt, isn't it? And then Joe Pantoliano just, I think, said, oh yeah, but Coppola could tell he was bluffing, but still he didn't fire him for that. That he let him continue to work, and he kind of adapted the situation to his needs. According to Joey Pants himself, that this role was during a scene in the flashback portion of The Godfather Part 2, where he plays a character, I believe, who attempts to jump I believe it's the gangster who the young Vito Corleone is trying to basically overpower.
Gotcha.
And so it didn't make the final cut, but I believe that there is some kind of DVD release of The Godfather Part 2 or all the movies where you can see his footage.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
Yeah.
I know he had also a run-in with Steven Spielberg when he was a lot younger, when he was in From Here to Eternity. Yeah. Apparently Steven Spielberg saw it and really liked him in it, and they had lunch or something. A friend of theirs, mutual friend, connected them, and they had lunch. And apparently Steven Spielberg was like, I really like you, man. I really would love to, put you in something. And they left that lunch, and Joe Pantoliano was like, that's awesome. This, young hit director thinks I'm cool.
Yeah.
And then was like, yeah, nothing's ever going to happen. But then in The Goonies, Steven Spielberg was a producer and second unit director in that movie. And lo and behold, I apparently put in a good word for him to the point where when he showed up on set, Steven Spielberg turned to him and said, I kept my promise, didn't I? And that's kind of cool. He seems like he's one of those guys who he's been around for so long, and he himself has just like story upon story upon story where, he's, rubbed elbows with the top of the top, but also makes has a lot of empathy and has a lot of love for people that we've never even really heard of too. So pretty cool guy.
The only piece of trivia, I kept reading this, but I could never find a citation for this piece of supposed trivia that Shrek is one of his favorite movies. I kept seeing this written. I could not find any citation. I don't know if this is true, but it's in several different places.
Oh, wow. Interesting. Shrek. Really?
Yes.
Is there anything else?
It literally,
it's just that.
IMDb trivia, one of his favorite movies is Shrek. And I tried to Google like Joe Pantoliano Shrek, and it was just like other kind of trivia type websites being like his favorite movie is Shrek. That's all it ever said. I could not find anything beyond that.
I wonder if it has anything to do with one thing that I've always found really funny is that you can often tell in an actor's career when they have kids that are of age to start watching movies. You talked about Racing Stripes, right? Yeah. When did that come out? Like maybe
2005.
Okay, totally. Well, he had kids, I think, who are probably, kids who are maybe 10 or under or something. To the point that you mentioned, it's like maybe he had to watch Shrek like 50 times.
Yeah.
And it just grew on him. To the point where he found like incredible, depths to that movie.
You're like, at this point, I can either be miserable and hate this movie, or I can really latch on to it.
Yeah, embrace it and love it. I felt that way about the movie Cars.
Yeah.
My son is obsessed with Cars. Obsessed, I should say. He's kind of moved on a little bit. But
I'm on to trucks now.
Yeah, he's on to construction vehicles. And has been there for a while. But he was so into that, and Cars totally missed me. I was definitely too old to see Cars. I was not in the demographic for that movie.
Yeah.
But, when you've seen it about the 25th, 26th, by that like 27th time, the ending of the movie and some of what's going on in it starts to resonate, man.
I mean, a lot of Pixar is very solid. I haven't seen Cars in a long time, but I remember enjoying Cars. I also saw Cars 2, which is not good.
That is not good.
It's not good.
It's shockingly not good.
It's very bad.
Yeah.
Yeah. That I saw that in college. I think I was probably in college when it came out. And I played on like our school campus movie theater for some reason. I was like, why the hell not? So, but plenty of reasons why not.
Yeah, definitely.
Don't see it. I never got to Cars 3.
I got around to Cars 3. It is better than Cars 2. It is not Cars 1.
Cars,
though.
the OG.
Yeah, and it's not OG Cars. But, we're talking about Pixar. I guess Shrek is DreamWorks.
Yeah.
And Joey Pants would probably put a vote out for DreamWorks, rivaling some of the Pixar quality. So, yeah, man, Joey Pants.
Someone's got to interview him to confirm that whole Shrek thing.
I think so.
Yeah.
I wonder if maybe someday,
because I would be
we're the people to do that.
So curious if this is not true, how this rumor started.
Yeah, totally.
Well, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we've sufficiently covered a lot of the points we set out.
I feel like I need to have more Joey Pants in my life.
Yeah.
I kind of binged a little bit of that over the last couple weeks, but
yeah.
I think there's room for more.
There's totally room for more. I know he reunites with the Wachowskis on their Sense8 TV show.
Yeah.
Right, yeah.
So maybe that's a good way to get that.
Yeah, and we can rest assured that even though we've already seen quite a bit with him, that with the length of his resume, there's plenty still to go.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah.
Guys, this was a lot of fun.
This has been our first deep dive.
It is, yes.
Close up, yeah.
Which
Close up.
we'll refer to as close up, I guess, going forward. But Joey Pants.
We appreciate you and your work. Keep at it.
Yes. Thank you so much.
All right, guys. Till next time.
Till next time.
Bye-bye.
See ya.